welcome this morning to Jenny and Raimi. They're going to talk about how they use empowering students to become more connected, independent learners through using academic advising processes. So thank you very much, Remy and Jenny. Over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Angela. So yeah, Raimi and I are here to talk about an initiative that we came up with called My Passport to Success. And it did come out during the pandemic, but it's one of those things that happened during the pandemic, which has actually made a big difference to students, and one of those things we're going to keep, and not one of those things we are planning to bin. So my name is Jenny Rose. I am a senior lecturer in accounting and finance, and Raimi is a lecturer in accounting and finance, and we're both at the University of Manchester. We both work very closely with one of the programmes, which is the BSc Accounting programme, and it's a relatively small programme with about 130 students on in total. So I'm the previous programme director, and Raimi is the new programme director starting just this month. We both have a background at KPMG so we come from the corporate world, and therefore we've seen how appraisals can make a really big difference. So when we started to see our students and we started to do those academic advisor meetings and personal tutor meetings, we really struggled with some of the mechanisms that were in place. Some of those conversations weren't giving us what we wanted them to give them. So we're going to talk about the kind of experience we've had and the challenges that we've had. And we'd love to hear from you at some of the challenges that you've faced when thinking about academic advisor or personal tutor meetings. What do you love and hate about them? We're going to talk to you about connected independent learners and this idea that we can encourage our students to be connected to us and to each other, but also that they can develop their independence and autonomy, which is absolutely vital when they leave university and go into the workplace successfully. We're going to show you a lot of detail about this Passport to Success, this Word document that we got students to complete before coming to academic advisor meetings that transformed some of the conversations that we've had over the last couple of years and empowered students as well. We'll talk a little bit about Microsoft Teams and then some of the results that we got from doing this initiative in Manchester. So I'd like to ask you, what are your experiences with personal tutoring? So in the chat box, if you could tell me a little bit about how you find personal tutoring or academic advisor meetings, the one-to-one meetings that we have with our students to help encourage them, to help them do well in their exams, realise their potential. And a lot of mine increasingly now are all about trying to find the next steps, trying to find placements and internships and graduate jobs. So in the chat box, how do you feel about personal tutoring? I definitely think I have quite a love-hate relationship with it. I'll just give you a few minutes to type in some of your thoughts about how you found personal tutoring or academic advisor meetings. Very difficult to get to know students. It was just a short, brief meeting. Yes, and I have over 40, I think I have 45 currently, academic advisor students. So trying to remember each of their individual problems. Some of them stick out, some of them I know very well, but some of them it was very hard to remember what I felt like they expected me to know about them. Worried you might not be able to help. Yeah, so it's a bit of a wild card. You don't really know what's going to come up, and therefore it's hard to know how to help them. To identify weaknesses and make an improvement plan. So we're trying to help move students forward. Some of our students were quite disengaged with personal tutoring and wouldn't even come to a meeting because they didn't see the usefulness of them. But when you come into the corporate world and when you come onto appraisals, you realise actually they're a really important part of keeping you developing and keeping that improvement plan coming. Another comment, each is very different as we're all different. It could be anything from counselling to the most pleasant meetings. Absolutely. I love it. Great to find out about the students, what motivates them and work with them to achieve what they want from the programme. Absolutely. You start to have that bit of a personal relationship with students and you can see how they develop over the time. So it can be really, really rewarding. Feeling you need to be the sage in the room. Yes, students do expect me to know everything and know how to connect them to whatever they want to do. So I had students saying, I want to go to Goldman Sachs. So I was trying to find a Goldman Sachs person, and what if I want to go into this, and what if I want to go into that? So you do feel like you need to be an oracle of information. I mostly enjoy, often learn from the students, as they are PGT students working in healthcare, and I consider them to be my peers. Fantastic, yes. So I'd say I mostly enjoy them, but they definitely have their challenges as well. The problem can be a lack of engagement from staff in the process, actually. Yeah, that's right. And there's often not much reward for staff for doing this. So, Raimi and I experienced quite similar ideas. We enjoyed them, but we often found that they could be really challenging. And we wanted to know our students better and help our students more, but we still only had these short meetings with them. So, Raimi, over to you about the one-to-one meetings.
Thank you, Jenny. So this was an interesting experience for me because, and this was pre-pandemic when I actually joined the university in 2019. So I was relatively new as an academic, coming from professional practice, as Jenny has said. And my experience with these one-to-one meetings were really incredibly, um, it was a whole varying degrees of, some great experiences, but at the same time, I found I had very little knowledge about these students, hardly any insight about their backgrounds or their interest and motivation levels, as Jenny said. And I think some of the students who actually came to the sessions just didn't show any engagement. I think for them, felt like a tick box exercise. I had to see the tutor, but they didn't really take any initiative in owning their learning process. And what was really challenging for me personally is I was responsible for over 20 students at the time in different year groups. And I just felt myself having the same repetitive conversations. We didn't seem to have any meaningful chats about what was their specific needs or what I could help them address more specifically. And I think what made it even more challenging was just no record of how we could, look back at what was the students' academic performance and their own reflections about how they track their own progress. So every time we went into a meeting in the next semester, you kind of needed to start that whole process again. And I think this was really very challenging for me at the start. But of course, the situation was exacerbated with the pandemic. When the pandemic struck, it became even more challenging. I think, and this was interesting because the keynote speaker, Fiona, mentioned this, how, we obviously lost the human aspect when we all moved online. And we had anxiety experienced not just by academics, but also by students. We had students telling us how they were suffering with mental health issues, they couldn't get jobs, and at the same time we've struggled as staff because we were getting to grips with moving all our learning to online. So this was obviously not just a university issue, it was a sector-wide issue, and we just felt that there was something that we needed to do to address this concern on both levels. How do we support the students who needed more one-to-one support, but at the same time, how do we support the staff who are meant to provide that one-to-one engagement with the students? Over to you then, Jenny.
So during the pandemic, it became really obvious that our students needed to be connected. And that was really important, but they also needed autonomy because we were aware that our time was limited, and also that to enable students to flourish after university, they need to be independent. So we came up with this idea of connected independent learners, and I think the graphic of these penguins explains that really well. So students do need nurturing, and they do need help, and they do need assistance. So we want them to be connected. We want them to feel seen and heard and valued, and to be able to make the most of their university experience. But also, they need to develop that independence and not rely on us in the same way that they relied on teachers at school. And they certainly can't rely on us in the future when they are employed. So we're trying to not only connect students and connect to students, but also empower them to be independent, which is massively important for their own self-motivation and getting that intrinsic motivation to do well for its own reward, rather than the carrots and the sticks that we use sometimes on our courses. So to try and get students to realise their potential, to make the most of time at university and to get the job of their dreams, I devised these 3 pillars which I wanted to embed on the accountancy programme in particular, but I think they'd go across any degree programme as some of the main skills that students need to develop. So I wanted them to think about different academic skills they need to develop to show their potential. I want them to really focus on flourishing and being aware of themselves, but also being able to develop their emotional intelligence and their well-being skills to be able to not just cope with university, but actually to thrive. And then the final pillar is all about employability skills. But then the challenge with this was, how do I get students to actually engage with this? So at the beginning of the pandemic, I had a fantastic walk in my garden with Raimi on the phone, talking about these pillars. And Raimi related it to her time at KPMG that we had together, about how important it was to think about a set of values or a set of pillars to embed. But we couldn't really think of a way of getting students to engage with this until we came up with this idea of having a passport to success, which was based on these ideas. Raiming.
Thanks, Jenny. Sorry, I think we've got the slides
Don't
and the
worry.
timer. They keep moving. Anyway, so
From the
that was the
Pratchett.
start of a brilliant project that Jenny and I then worked on. We recognized that we needed something more holistic that could help us bring all of this together, improve the quality of these personal tutor meetings, and more importantly, as Jenny alluded to earlier, we wanted to empower our students. We wanted them to take ownership of their learning, help them develop those key transferable skills that was expected of them before they went into the workplace. And why did I call it my passport to success? I think this is interesting because I had this idea during lockdown at a point when we could not travel. So, I thought to myself, but if you think about the notion of learning being a reflective lifelong journey, this was really a suitable title for our project. And just to share with you then, what was the passport to success and how did it transform then our students' learning experiences? And if I were to summarize this, the main purpose was really to encourage our students to engage in critical self-reflection. We wanted them to have time to just think about what were their motivation levels, some of the important areas, that they needed to consider before they even had any meetings with their tutors. And I think what was really, really useful feedback that we also gathered was students just needed access to resources and to know where to get those resources, whether they were support channels or just online resources that could help them through this journey. And therefore, then we would have hoped that by using all of that important resources, they would actually be prepared before they met their tutor and have more targeted conversations. I'm just going to stop sharing the slides for a minute because I'm sure you're curious at this point to see what this passport actually looks like. So I'm just going to quickly give you a whistle-stop tour of our passport. Jenny, could you just confirm if that's come up now on screen? Perfect. So just to share with you then this digital, and it's a digital workbook, it is reusable and totally tailorable to any program. Naturally, it links into the 3 pillars that Jenny alluded to earlier. And what we like for students to do is, again, share a little bit background about themselves so that we build that human connection with our students and we build trust as well by knowing about their background, about their motivations, and just a little bit upfront information for us to better understand the students. So the way we set this up is we give them the opportunity to do this before they get really busy with their classes, with the point when they join the university in the first couple of weeks. And we want them to spend some time just thinking about these questions. And as you can see, it very much goes back to what Jenny just talked about, the 3 pillars and the skills. So where do they see themselves in terms of some of these skills, and what really do they need to do to improve them? Now, as you can see, there are a lot of hyperlinks throughout the document, as I said, to make it easy for students to know where they can just get a little bit of understanding about some of these skills if they had not heard of them before. And this then builds up to also touch on their pastoral needs around well-being, and of course, more importantly, specific skills linked to how students can flourish, as Jenny mentioned, and of course, what is so important and paramount is the employability aspect as well. And for us, this is very much in sync with what the ICAW also promotes as some of those key transferable skills for employability. So this is what we expect our students to do up front. And as you can see, a lot of great questions to prompt them to try and get linked up with all the resource and support channels at the university. Just a good way for them to get started and very inclusive to have this opportunity for all students. So when they actually do then think about goals, we give them an opportunity to meet with the advisor and agree on those realistic goals. So just set some simple goals that they can work towards. And when they do come in for the one-to-one discussions, do these reflections up front before we actually have those discussions. And personally, I can tell you, since we started this initiative, my conversations with the students have transformed tremendously. I don't find myself just talking about using the resources. We're actually discussing specific needs of those students and then trying to agree on an action plan. So as I said, this was just a whistle-stop tour. You can see that this obviously will carry on every semester, and we do get them to share, even this document with their coaches if they want to include some of that feedback, and the academic advisor summarizing a little bit as well on what was agreed. So this is really the passport that we wanted to share with you. And of course, it's great when they get to that end point, isn't it, Jenny? When you feel that sense of accomplishment, I've actually gone through that process and made it till the end. And just then to go back to the slides, just bear with me. I will just bring the slides back up. There we go. Does that come up, Jenny?
Yeah.
Perfect. Over to you then.
So I've already got some views, which is fantastic, and it's really nice to see that coming through in the chat box before we even asked you the question. I think you probably knew that this was coming. Some people saying it's great. Avril asked, did we consider using an e-portfolio such as PebblePad for this? And I think we did think about different formats for this, but we went for Word in the end because it's easy for students to edit. They can take it with them when they go, and it's much more transferable. Anything to add to that, Raimi, about the format for
Yeah,
the?
I think that's a very good point because I think the format was really important, and I think we needed it to be a real-time document that was easily updated. So it needed to be accessible, and it kind of nicely brings me into the point of how then we brought that sort of together when we designed it, because we needed to make sure that this will work for students. It was a format that was easily accessible by both tutors and students. And again, in terms of the process itself, as you can see from the slide, it was a collaborative effort. And I think that was the fantastic bit about this project, because as tutors, we were not in a position sometimes to know what was it that students really needed. So we had a number of stakeholders, internal stakeholders, the library, our career support, student support, and more importantly, we had the student lens. We had a student who helped us create an example version that then we could share with other students just to help them understand how to complete some of those specific areas. And what was even brilliant was how are we going to get the buy-in? We managed to get endorsements from our professional accounting bodies, our tutors, so that we shared this as a voice thread clip just to encourage people to recognize the benefits of the passport. And I think that was how we deployed it.
Yeah.
Of course,
And so
then the digital
I've
platform was
one other
important,
just
wasn't it, Jenny?
point to make for Avril's saying that they can keep Pebblebad for life by creating an alumni account, which is something I wasn't aware of. So I think it's important that they can take this and use it for life, but I definitely think there could be other ways to present it. Alina said, can we have this document? Yes, we've got a fantastic template that we can share with you. So send us an email and we can share that with you so that you can use it. We're really keen for this to be used to put that agency onto students to prepare for the meetings and to then have much better conversations with them. And then Angela asked, is the document a continually living document throughout the student journey? Absolutely. So they start it in first year, they set up, tell us about themselves and their motivations, and then it's updated every semester. So the 6 updates that they do in the document, and that actually shows their journey through university. And as we're starting to see those that have done the passport getting to their final years, you can just see how they're developed and their motivations have moved on, and them being aware of how they've changed because it's all in one document is actually a really beautiful thing to see. I'll put my email address in the chat box. If you send me or Raimi an email, we will be able to get back to you. Sorry, back to Microsoft Teams, Raimi.
No, that's all right, Jenny. It's such a shame I can't see the chat at the moment, but thanks for letting me know what it's coming through. So just to touch on the point as well, we needed a platform, obviously, to deploy this initiative. And at the time when we first started, Teams was obviously, just being introduced in the university. And we felt that the purpose of this was it needed to be password protected because we wanted to safeguard privacy. This was information shared between the tutor and the students. And so it was important to have a safe space to host it. And so Teams was a perfect solution. And also we started, thinking about how do you build that trust and that sense of community that was, alluded to in the keynote speakers session as well. How do you build trust and community with students? And so a more personalized approach was important so that we could have, chat functionality being used as opposed to formal emails being exchanged. And again, this was something that obviously we started off during, the pandemic. We've moved on quite a bit, trying to vary the approach now that we're back on campus. We're still using Teams to host the passports. Of course, we've resumed to in-person meetings. And me personally, I just love the Teams app because I find it so flexible. And, when I'm on the go, I can just respond very quickly. So there are a lot of advantages with the platform and how we deployed it. But of course, with any initiative, we wanted feedback. We wanted to know how students found this experience and whether it was actually working for them. So what we did in May 2021 is we ran a survey and we had very specific questions about the passport. We had about 36 students that participated. So not a very huge proportion of our full student population on this program, but nevertheless, it gave us some interesting feedback around how many people actually used it before their meeting. So that was more than 50%, 22% after, but there was also that number of students that did not engage. Bearing in mind this was still during that pandemic, where we were still transitioning and getting to grips with blended ways of operating. And what was really interesting is the comments that we received. We had people that felt the benefits, experienced it because they engaged and they felt that they were understanding about their learning and having an opportunity to set goals and reflect. But at the same time, we had challenges as well from those who felt still pressurized or who perhaps struggle with setting goals. And this was great for us because we needed them to tell us what are those struggles and how could we then improve the passport and the support we provided. Now, Jenny and I also then decided to do a focus group. So we had a few students, mainly final years, but also a second year student who shared greater insights about their experiences. And it was great that it was very similar to what we saw in the survey, but also the digital format worked. I think the fact that they could do real-time updates, they had structure, it wasn't too free-form, helped the students with the reflections. But what I really liked about this was where they said, it can be time consuming. They were very honest and we took this on board, and now we're actually trying to factor in time to give students an opportunity to do this properly earlier on in the process before they got too busy. And I liked the bit about the final year students who felt that for us to promote this, we could share their positive experiences. And so we had all these testimonials that the students had shared with us, which was really fantastic. Some of them who benefited found it worthwhile, but I like that last quote there where the student does honestly tell us that this was, a painful process, to fill in those pages. But she did go back to it when she needed to get some reflections when she was doing a summer competition. So there was a benefit still, although the investment of time up front sometimes is not appreciated until much later. So to sum this up, we felt that students did benefit. We were trying to link them up. We were wanting them to be autonomous learners, help them identify their gaps and set goals, but also trying to push them to start that employment opportunity process a little earlier so that they have a better chance of sort of securing internships and placements. Over to you then, Jenny.
So I think you can see what a useful document it is. You can see how it has transformed students' lives, and they don't always do it straight away, and they're not always excited about it. But it's really interesting to see that some of the students that I wouldn't have expected spent 4 or 5 hours in reflection, filling out this document, this guided way of thinking about their university life, and they got a lot out of it. They saw the work, how worthwhile it was. This was not credit bearing, and they were not forced to do this for any kind of carrot. And we didn't usually use a stick in the meetings, although occasionally I would be asking, can I see your passport to success? And some of them found it a long document to fill out, but those that really engaged with it got a huge amount out of it. Maybe not quite the point we wanted, like our student that did it over summer, but they were finding that they could find information for themselves, they could prepare for meetings, and they just felt that these conversations were a lot better. So we've just got a last few minutes. If you've got any final questions or thoughts, I think I've got a few people that are really interested in the template, which we can absolutely share with you. Just send us an email and we will get back to you with the details of that. So it was great for students. It was really good for tutors. We found that we were able to have much better conversations and just more fun and more enjoyable. And I felt less on the back foot because I could read the passport and remind myself what country my students were from, what their motivations, what their worries were, and what was going on with them, without that awkward conversations that I have had in the past of not quite remembering where my tutees have come from. And it's all part of building up a community of practice. So it's them being able to understand themselves better so that we can try and bring students together in a community of practice and include the tutors in that so that we're all sharing information freely to be able to belong into, as it was in this case, the BSc accounting community. So our students do really well, and they're nearly half of them get first grades because they do put their time into thinking about their academic skills as well as their knowledge. Many of our students go on to do very successful placements, and we've got high levels of employability. And we're starting to reach this into many different universities now. So anyone who gets the template, and we're trying to track where this template is going and how it's getting spread around the university, because it's a really good initiative to take forward, great way to empower students and a great way to make sure those conversations are much, much more enjoyable. I've got some final questions in the chat, but I think we are out of time. Is that right, Angela?
Sorry, my mute button. Yes, I think we are, but we can put those questions at the end, Jenny. We can keep those questions at the end. So
I'll respond
try
in the chat now if that's okay. And then
okay, and I'll try and screenshot the questions anyway. Okay, so excuse me, I'm not even on camera. So can I ask for Sara and Rebecca to make their camera visible or turn on their camera? Hello, Sara. Are we expecting Rebecca?
She is here. Yeah, I've seen her on the call.
Okay.
I'm here. I'm having issues
sorry.
getting my camera working. Bear with me. It's all right. I'm not a senior lecturer in online learning or anything.
Do you need my help? Is it something I've done?
I think it's me. Don't worry. I'll
Okay.
get that.
Ah, there she is.
I love the background. If it's real, that's cool. Traveling
I
somewhere new.
I was quite glad it was online because I'm on holiday this week, so it worked quite well for me.
Okay. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sara and Rebecca from Swansea University. They run a work-based learning program for registered healthcare workers. And at the start of the pandemic, where their students were being deployed to different services and trying to juggle home life, they saw that they were the only place where their student support or academic advisors were the only place that these students could decompress. So what we want to look at is the results from developing a new approach to making an inclusive learning environment. That's what they're going to summarise today. So thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Angela. I shall share the screen. Rebecca, if you can let me know if we're sharing the right thing, because we're more used to using Zoom than we are Teams. Is that showing? Bex?
It is, yeah. You just need to put it onto present mode.
There we are. I'm in, sorted. Thank you. Okay, Borja, good morning. I'm Sara Galletly and I'm lecturer in professional and workforce development, and I'm programme director for the MSc in Enhanced Professional Practice. Thanks.
I'm muting now. I'm Rebecca Pratchett. I'm a senior lecturer in online learning and I teach on Sara's MSc.
We're going to look at or critically reflect on our approach to academic mentoring during the COVID pandemic. As a team, there's 5 of us all together. So as a team, we've reflected on sort of how our practice has changed really over the last 2.5 years, and how we've provided a more inclusive learning environment for our learners who are all working on the COVID frontline during the pandemic, and obviously still are. And they're dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic now as well. We're going to outline sort of the humanistic approach that we took during that time, as opposed to focusing purely on our academic mentoring role. We're going to discuss how compassionate leadership played a key role in both supporting our learners and ourselves as well in the team. We're going to look at the structure and flexibility of inclusive practice and look at how we can best support our part-time learners. So we're going to go through what the programme is about, how it's delivered, and then we're going to go through sort of our experience over the last 2.5 years. And to summarise then, we're going to just sort of look at sort of where we're at now and what we're doing sort of ongoing really. So our students, they all work in the NHS in Wales. So mostly across the M4 corridor, sort of from Cwmtaf Health Board, Swansea and Hywel Dda. Just because of we sort of word of mouth really, that's how we get most of our students at the minute. We have had students further afield, Cardiff, and we've had some students from Cambridge as well. I think that's the furthest that we've had students from. We also work with students who are working for Pan Wales organisations as well, such as Public Health Wales and Welsh Ambulance Service. So our students must have at least 2 years experience as working as registered health professionals. And so we have nurses, midwives, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, paramedics, you name it, we've pretty much had them on the course. And they're at mostly at senior management levels. They've nearly all got patient contact, but we have, if any of you are aware of the banding structure within the health boards, or in the NHS, it's the same in England, from band 5, which is sort of staff nurse level, to sort of 8B, 8C, which are very senior managers. So we cover quite a range of healthcare professionals. Our programmes, we've got 5 enhanced professional programmes at levels 5 to 7. I am going to concentrate on the MSc in Enhanced Professional Practice purely because that's my area of speciality, and Rebecca's a teacher and mentor on that programme as well. So we're work-based learning, and in that we have an induction week. We run monthly action learning sets. We've got a whole host of online learning resources, and we use one-to-one academic supervision and mentoring. So all in all, it's a blended learning approach, and I'll just go into a little bit more detail about what each of those areas includes. So work-based learning, as you'll know, is predominantly a student-centred approach, which obviously underpins everything we do. We respond to our students' learning needs through their academic supervision and mentoring. For example, we use a learning contract that the students will negotiate. There are some set learning outcomes for each module, but what we'll do is then negotiate with them to generate their 2 individual personal learning outcomes as well for each module. So we're led by the students. which comes into sort of more of the discussion later on in the presentation. Induction week, pre-COVID, we used to do this 5 days in the classroom on campus, and it was a good opportunity for networking and for the students to actually adopt the role of students. So they were setting aside their healthcare professional role and identifying as a student. Of course, that was lost last 2 inductions where we've done those online. We switched to Zoom, so it wasn't quite the same networking experience for the students, and there was a bit of a disconnect with the university as well, because they weren't coming onto campus and sampling coffee shops and going to the library and all of those things that students do. This year our induction is a hybrid, so we've got 3 days on campus and 2 days remote, where students will be self-directed. We'll give them set activities during the week that we will then discuss during the days that we're in campus, and that's to give a good sort of blend where students are on campus but also getting to grips with being that work-based learning student, and being more self-directed with what they need to do for their portfolio work. Monthly action learning sets. Fiona mentioned earlier on about isolation with students, and this is one of the ways that we get around that, because students don't come in to university on a regular basis. So we have action learning sets which have usually been 2 hours once a month. Pre-COVID, obviously either on campus or we would go into the healthcare setting, so we'd go to some of our health board hospitals and set up those action learning sets there. For the last 2 years, obviously they've been on Zoom, so this year we're doing a mix of on campus and also online. We can't go back into the health boards yet because there's still some restrictions on visiting due to the COVID situation. Canvas online learning resources. These very generic topics that students at whatever level and whatever programme they're working on, they can use. So they're in charge of what they learn and what they look at, depending on the module that they're on. So for example, some of the themes that we've got are management and leadership, we've got change management, we've got communication in practice. So they are general, and students can perhaps use some of those learning resources on more than one module if they need to. Oh, sorry.
Back another one.
Back. Sorry about that. Okay, academic supervision and mentoring. So again, we use one-to-one supervision with our students, and again that's student led, so they let us know when they can meet, and we'll negotiate a sort of what am I trying to say, mutually convenient time to meet. And again, that can be on campus or via Teams, which is generally what our students use, because they can access their supervision while they're actually in the workplace, which is really, that's one of the best things I think that's worked over the last 2 years, is that they've been able to access us while they're in work. We did used to go into the health boards and meet students in their workplace, but of course we've not been able to do that over the last 2 years. I just want to quickly, before I move on, just mention assessment. So our students are assessed through a portfolio development, which is very critically reflective. They generate 3 or 4 pieces of evidence, so they can be things like essays, literature reviews. We use mind maps, SWOT analysis, case studies perhaps. So there'll be the evidence, and then the students will write a 2,000-word narrative about what they've learnt and how they've applied that to practice. So it's very, very individualised learning, and very sort of reflective on their practice. So in terms of a teaching team, it's fantastic because we really see how patient care is being positively impacted on through the learning that our students do. So that's our students and our programmes, just to set the scene for you so you know what the basis is before we talk about how things changed during the pandemic. Over to Rebecca.
Just to let you know, Sarah, you've got the preview version on, so everyone's getting a preview of all our lovely text.
Oh, right, okay. How do I change
See
that?
how much we're cheating. I think display settings might let you switch the screens around.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. Swap presenter review and slideshow. There you go.
That's it. So sorry, everyone. Seeing our notes.
You
see
had
how much.
started before we actually realised that was the case, so I decided to leave you continue rather than stop you mid
Did we
talk.
waffle on?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So now you know a bit about our programmes. I want you to picture the scene. It's December 2019 and we're starting to get a sense from our students that something big is brewing. And it was a little bit like sitting on the beach watching a tsunami start to build offshore. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know exactly what was coming, but we knew it was going to be big. And by January, February, our students were being retrained. So we had operating department practitioners being retrained to work in ICU and use ventilators and things. So we got this sense that actually what was coming was going to be really big. And by time March came and the wave broke across the country, our students were already in the thick of it, dealing with patients on the front line of the healthcare crisis. Sara. Slide, please. I feel like I'm giving
I've done it.
Oh, there we go. So we're going to use this word. I apologise for using it. I know it's probably the most overused word in the last 2.5 years, but it is used for good reason, and that is that we had never had students working on the front line of a healthcare crisis before. We'd never taught students working on the front line of a health crisis, and for an evidence-based programme we were sort of thrown into the deep end really, because we had no evidence on how to support learners through this crisis. So for us it was quite scary, and it was a completely unprecedented situation when it came to mentoring and supervising students. There we go. So the theory we're coming from, nice simple theory, we're coming from Maslow's hierarchy. And essentially our mentoring policy and the way that we worked as a student-centred programme was working on those top 2 aspects of the pyramid. Being employed by the NHS, most of them had that sort of physiological needs covered. They had security in terms of financial security, they had homes, you know, they had full-time jobs normally that were supporting that. They had the love of their family, as well as the belongingness of a working environment where they were working within quite close teams. So those bottom 3 aspects of the pyramid were well covered normally, and we just focused on those top 2. And then when COVID hit, what we found actually was that our students were working much further down that pyramid. They were quite often living in caravans on their own driveways. They didn't have access to family and friends to talk to. Their work teams were being split up to be redeployed all over the place. So they were working with completely different teams. They weren't able to discuss the issues they were having because everyone was under so much stress. And when it comes to those sort of safety and security needs, there was a sense of genuine fear from our students, bearing in mind this was pre-vaccination, that they were going to bring something home to their family. They were quite often caring for older parents or vulnerable people, and they were really scared they were going to bring this home and kill their family. So from that aspect, we thought our students, because they can't get to that top tier of it, they're going to need to drop out. They're going to need to pull off the course. This is the one thing that can give. They can't give up their jobs. They can't give up their families. So we expected the withdrawals to come in, but we were wrong. Actually, whilst we did have a few extensions come in, quite a lot of extensions, we found students were attending the action learning sets and attending mentoring as before. They still wanted to come along. It's just the structure that changed, and that's what we're going to discuss really here today.
In the words of Sir Mick Jagger, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get what you need. Students were coming to us, excuse me, for academic supervision because that's what they wanted, but actually they were getting pastoral support, which is what they needed. However, this wasn't in line with our university academic mentoring policy, which suggests that we signpost students to the relevant teams within the university or wider. But this was an unprecedented situation and our policy did not reflect that. So instinctively, at the start of each mentoring session or advising session, we just simply asked each student, how are you? We did that without even sort of thinking about it really. And that we did that before we engaged in any discussion about their coursework, and we genuinely meant it. Very often in conversation, how are you is sort of small talk, and we're not really necessarily expecting a full-on answer, and people don't expect to give a full-on answer, but this was different. Normally what we would find during supervision is that students would just say, yeah, that's fine, I'm really busy, and then they would start talking about their coursework. But actually, when we asked the question, how are you, we could be having a conversation for about half an hour where the students were talking about their clinical work, how they were feeling, how frightened they were, and how, you know, the situation was affecting their home life and family members, you know, often with themselves or perhaps family members or colleagues with COVID. And it was almost like they needed to just dump that out of the way before they could focus on their coursework. And we just allowed the students to do that. We weren't sort of clock watching, thinking, right, come on, you know, you need to move on. We just knew that they needed to offload before they could concentrate on what it was that they actually wanted to talk to us about. It's just that they didn't realise that they needed to offload it, that it just happened sort of spontaneously, really. In terms of empathy, you know, we've talked a lot about compassionate leadership this morning. Excuse me, but there's a lot of empathy. You know, the course team, we've all had experience of working in the NHS. I'm a nurse by background, and Rebecca's a psychologist, so we know how tough it can be on a normal day, but working through a pandemic is nothing any of us have experienced before. And going back to what Rebecca said about Maslow's hierarchy, it just enabled a sense of safety and security for our students, even if it was just for that half an hour or hour that they were meeting with us. And again, obviously we were on Zoom at this point. They were able to offload without any judgment or distraction, or any consequence as well, because they weren't offloading to colleagues who were experiencing the same intensity on the COVID front line. We were seen as perhaps a neutrality. And I'm not sure that we saw it that way at the time. We just did it because that's what was needed in that situation. We just reacted to the conversation that we were presented with. The supervision sessions, they also benefited us as academic staff, again, linking back to Maslow's hierarchy, because they gave us a sense of belonging as well. You know, some of us live on our own, and very often speaking to the students or having a quick coffee with a colleague was the only human interaction we'd have, unless you had to dash over to Tesco's and get something, and then it was a bit like a supermarket sweep episode. So, you know, we needed that human contact as well, even though it was sort of virtual, if you like. So, you know, our strategies during this time of supporting the students moved from a constructive approach to more of a humanistic side. We were looking at the person rather than just the student. We wanted to know how they were, how their day-to-day lives were. And so, particularly as we were a work-based learning situation, we focus on the student anyway, but it was bigger than that. We were more holistic. So both staff and students, we got what we needed rather than what we wanted. We both wanted supervision meetings, but what we both needed was human virtual contact. Rebecca.
So we're a bit of a fan of a metaphor, you might have noticed. Hopefully some of you recognise these as Doctor Who companions, and there's a good reason for bringing them up. If you think back to the 70s and 80s, for those of you familiar with the show, the companion was sort of someone along on the journey, someone for the Doctor to impress, to bounce ideas off, and to sort of travel along with him as a companion. But what we've seen, well, that was certainly our role before. We were on the journey with them. We were there to bounce ideas off. They led the way with choosing their learning outcomes and how they wanted to address that. And we were that sort of advice, able to be impressed by them as they worked their way up that hierarchy and self-actualized. But the more recent companions, these ones that you see here in the more recent versions of Doctor Who, they've had another really important role, and that is to remind the Doctor of his humanity, to bring that slightly more personal aspect. And when he starts to get too involved in a battle or involved in an interaction with his foes, it's to remind him of what the purpose of the journey is, to remind him of what they're there for. And that is the sort of role that we took on then. It was giving students a space to fail, to be vulnerable, to not be the expert in the room, to be able to say, actually, I don't know what I'm doing. So it was that safe space for that. And it was a space to be completely human. And that is the role that we undertook then as companions on their learning journey. Beyond being there as academics, we were also there as people, looking after the humanity within them as well.
Mentioned action learning sets earlier on and how we use that to help reduce some of the isolation that work-based learners can sort of experience. So when the pandemic hit and the university shut down, so March 2020, we decided to cancel the action learning set. So we cancelled the March through to June action learning sets because for a number of reasons really. One, we assumed that students would not be able to attend or not want to attend just because of the escalating situation in the NHS. You know, there was lack of time and availability to attend because of the workload pressures. They were moving to different areas and it was just all hands on deck. So we felt that, you know, they are going to have priorities elsewhere. Our assumptions were purely assumptions because we had no evidence to go on, because obviously this had never happened to any of us before. The other thing we needed to consider as well was how would we facilitate online action learning sets? You know, none of the team had used Zoom before and our students hadn't used Zoom. We hadn't even used them in a one-to-one meeting. It was this new technological sort of tool that we could use that we'd never used. So we had to learn how to use it ourselves, really, in the safety of, you know, doing that with team colleagues rather than setting up action learning sets for a group of students across multiple sites. So we needed a bit of sort of learning for us. However, once the new academic year started, we decided to give, you know, to provide action learning and sets online to give more normality to the programme again. It was something that was familiar to students, despite it being online, and we were a bit more technologically adept at this time. So even though we were both new to it in terms of academics and students, we set up the online sessions and we gave monthly dates in advance as well, so students could see there was a bit of continued structure, because everything else in their world at this time was completely chaotic and uncertain. And we noticed actually initially we had really good attendance, much more than we'd ever had doing the actual face-to-face sessions, which rather surprised us really. And we just wondered whether it was a welcome break from the stresses and strains that the students were feeling out in their workplace, because we noticed, as opposed to our individual supervision sessions where students focused for the first half an hour or so on what was going on in their world, when they came to an action learning set, they went straight on to talk about their academic work. So it's a complete opposite. The sessions were really positive and upbeat. They were happy to be on the call with other students, and it was a social aspect as well. They rarely talked about what was going on in their clinical practice. And I think that, you know, reflecting on it, that it just actually gave them a reprieve for 2 hours once a month. They could talk about something else. We know that there's, you know, the social isolation associated with distance learning and remote learning. And it just seemed even more important to promote these while we were all being, you know, sort of working remotely during the pandemic. They really did seem to appreciate the action learning sets as a safe space, because again, you know, the university was seen as neutral. So even though we're healthcare professionals ourselves, they see us as being neutral and not involved in their day-to-day work. So just reinforcing really that it was a bit of an escape for a couple of hours. And as a team, for us, it was really nice to see that the students engage with each other in a positive way, because we knew that they were just, you know, experiencing hell actually out in the clinical workplace. It was a bit of a light relief as well for us as a team, because our one-to-one supervisions could be quite emotionally labour intensive because of what we were hearing about the students' experience and the fear and the fright that they were going through with what was going on. So the action learning sets for us were always valuable during the pre-pandemic times, but we think that they were even more valuable for everybody, for staff and students, during the pandemic. So we're continuing with those this year, obviously, but we're doing them as a mix of campus and online as well, just because in response to a small study that we did, that came out as the best option. So we're hoping again to bring the students together in whatever form they choose is going to help them reduce that isolation, but also to help them share their experiences of their academic work, because that's what they tend to focus on during these meetings.
I don't know if you can see, Sarah, we've had our 2-minute warning.
Oh, right, okay. Okay, so and I didn't see it, but thank you. As staff, we experienced vicarious trauma. Many of us experienced bereavement from family and friends during this time, and obviously our students were as well. So it was really important that we kind of sent a lifeline to each other, whether that was to students and colleagues. So again, it comes back to seeing the human first rather than the student first. And of course, this was going but not in line with all of our academic mentoring policies. They need to be a bit more flexible, really. And this is where we kind of challenge what traditionally we have had in our university, because, you know, looking at the flexibility to support students when they're going through such difficult times.
That's it. I think we were not changed back yet. Our students are still dealing with the aftermath of COVID, and they're still dealing with the burnout and the lack of staffing and the backlog of cases. So our approach is still far more human-centred, and that sort of led us on to these critical questions that we wanted to raise today, and they're sort of the crux of it. So Sara, I'll pass back over.
Yeah, we just get back on top of the wave. Obviously, lots of sea things here because we're right on the coast in Swansea. It's just a good opportunity to think, should we reconsider the focus of work-based learning, and should we be more person-centred, more human-centred rather than student-centred? And is current academic mentoring policy fit for purpose during times of crises? And what is our role as facilitators going forward? So very quickly on the last slide, it's just to be mindful that our students, very often things are going swimmingly, they're absolutely fine. We just need to know and recognise when situations are different, whether that's a global pandemic, a period of national mourning, or whether somebody's going through a personal bereavement, that as academic supervisors and academic teachers, that we need to respond to our students on an individual basis and put their human focus first rather than always the student focus. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, Sara. Thank you
How
very
do I
much.
unshare? Thank
The
you.
little icon up at the top on the right-hand side, it
there we
says
are.
share. Yeah, there we are. Thank
We're
you.
Zoom focused in Swansea. Thank you. Sorry we went over a little bit.
Okay. Very, very visual, insightful talk. Great use of imagery. Great, enjoyed that a lot. Yeah, so human-centered critical wave. Do we have any questions? Yeah. Yes, I think you pointed out a lot of how the role of the tutor has changed and during the pandemic, and I think you were faced with frontline students, which were, as you pointed out, very centered. Their needs on the three levels, bottom three levels, were all because they were mature students, working students. They didn't have some of the issues that Jenny and Reimala pointed out with undergrads typically that weren't working. Yeah, do we have any questions? Does anyone have any questions from the first presentation? What do you see as the challenges moving forward from, you know, having online? Will you ever come back face to face, or do you see that students have your students want to stay with Zoom calls rather than with the traditional face-to-face sessions that you used to run before the pandemic?
We're going towards a more sort of hybrid approach of mixing both. So our induction is going to be both in person. So we'll have 3 days in person and then 2 days that they'll be self-directed with some Zoom sessions built into that as well. The action learning sets are going to be both. So they'll alternate between 1 month it'll be on campus in person and then the next month online. Because we're student led, we allow them, and it promotes the inclusivity in terms of allowing them to choose what's best for them. Some students still prefer online and some prefer to be in person. So it's kind of being all things to all students. I think that's what we're trying to go for this year. So we'll see how it works. We're going to evaluate it at the end of the year to see what has been the best thing. But I think personally, people like to be in a room with other people.
If I may just add as well, there's a real advantage to going and seeing students in their workplace. I don't know what it's like to be an occupational therapist in a rural daycare centre. I don't know what it's like to be a physio in a busy hospital in Swansea. So for me, going to these spaces to see where students are working, they give us a bit of a tour around where they work. And so visiting them there allows you to see their working environment, allows you to see where their specialism is and see the sorts of teams they're working in. And I think it also brings them into a little bit more into it breaks down that initial barrier of personal tutoring, of this sage on the stage, academic intimidation, and it's actually, we're in their safe space, they're in control there, that is their domain, and we're going into that. So it immediately breaks down that barrier that could otherwise be there if we bring them into our office and sit them behind our desk and say, tell me about your goals for this program. So I think there's advantages to going out into their workplace that can't really be simulated online in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's what I think going forward. That's what it's just to make sure that you don't have burnout, which is what our very first speaker today had talking about, where you have that hybrid learning, where you're doing two types of work for the same number of students. But again, the other question I had was how many students are in your group, are typically in each cohort?
For the masters, usually about 12.
12, yeah.
Per
So
year, per cohort. But for things like action learning sets, there'll be students from the other enhanced professional practice programs as well. So we might have different levels of students. So there could be anything up to sort of 20 people. So it's quite an interdisciplinary sort of learning space, really.
right, thank you very much. Do we
Thank
have
you.
any other questions? Helen has said thank you. Love the session focused on a world I don't know much about. And I think, yeah, from your perspective, you were one step away from the front line trying to support these workers. So yeah, really useful. And just a reminder to be aware of the other lives, our learners, when working with them. Yeah, the other lives. Yes, I think that's what the pandemic has brought us into, Neil, is that we're all aware that we might have had a little crisis in our household, but they were having crises in their households. We're all trying to just get it done. Thank you very much. If
Thank you.
there's no other questions, then I'll end this session's